put it on the table.
We can do that.
Testing.
Perfect.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Okay. So the topic of tonight's shiur is the history and Hashkafa in the Igris of the Rebbe Rashab. So today is called Pesher, and led us to the Rebbe Rashab. So we'll speak a little bit about the writings of the Rebbe Rashab in Igris Kodesh. Now, many of us are familiar with the Maimorim of the Rebbe Rashab, a little less familiar with the Sichos of the Rebbe Rashab. The Igris Kodesh Rebbe Rashab is not really such a popularly learned sefer, but it contains a tremendous amount of insight and information about the Rebbe Rashab's askonas. Now, it's interesting that during the lifetime of the Rebbe Rashab was mostly known, outside of Lubavitch, was mostly known for his askonas, for his public activities, his involvement in different things in Russia, in Yiddishkeit in Russia, and this is what the Rebbe Rashab was known for. People didn't know about the Rebbe Rashab as the Chassidus of the Rebbe Rashab. It wasn't known outside of Lubavitch, but the Rebbe Rashab was tremendous asken, which is very interesting because the Rebbe Rashab doesn't come across. You know, the signal of the Rebbe Rashab is not an asken type of. There's a certain Rebbeim were more. You could understand. You see how they were leaders in askonas, and the Rebbe Rashab was more introverted and more focused on the Maimorim and the avodah Chatmimim. But we look through that. You look through the history. You look through the Igris Kodesh of the Rebbe Rashab, and you see a tremendous amount of activities in all kinds of areas. During the time of the Rebbe Rashab, there was a widespread breakdown of the classical Yiddish communities, Jewish communities. And whereas in Yiddishkeit until then, there were established communities, the yeshivas, the Yidden were frum, and the Haskalah, we know that the Haskalah didn't start during the times of the Rebbe Rashab, it started earlier, but this breakdown really came to a low point in the time of the Rebbe Rashab. Things really started to fall apart as far as the Haskalah making inroads into the Yiddish communities and affecting the infrastructure of the communities. It's something that has relevance. It has relevance. Talk about the infrastructure of a community, of Yiddishkeit, of the frum world. So it has certain parallels, certain similarities to today. When you want to understand the way a community is, the way to deal. There's the way to deal with. Like the times of Fidik Rebbe with Gzeiris and Mesiras Nefesh. There's a time of Hafotza and Hasfasa Yadus and spreading Yiddishkeit. It puts them on a Sefer Chutza. And then there's how to build the infrastructure of Yiddishkeit. That you see baking in the Rebbe Rashab. I'm going to go through a few different areas, a few different noisim. Go through a few different areas of the areas where the Rebbe Rashab addressed in the Igris Kodesh. Interesting points. So during one of the active organizations of Haskalah during the time of the Rebbe Rashab was the Chavris Mafitzi Haskalah, and they were active in trying to spread Haskalah amongst from Yidden. They did so by first they started targeting older people, Bachrim, Yingalite, and at the time of the Rebbe Rashab, that's when they actually started much more working on, consistently and methodically working on schools, on Haskalah in the schools, establishing their own schools, Haskalah schools, and trying to get the government to push the Haskalah in to push their demands from the Chadara that they have to have certain standards. The Rebbe Rashab is very strongly against it, understandably against the Chavris Mafitzi Haskalah and their activities. And the Rebbe Rashab writes how the Chochmas Chitzonius, the fact that Bechlal they wanted to introduce learning secular studies in the Chadarim. And Rabbi Rashab writes how Chochmas Chitzonius they enforce the yeshes, a person's yeshes, and they can lead a person to kfira and the Eibishter. And Rabbi Rashab writes very strongly about the Talmidim of Yisrael Salanter, that even though he sent Talmidim to go learn the Mudachayel, to learn secular studies, to go to university, and the impact that it had on them, that they left Yiddishkeit, that they became maskilim. Some of his Talmidim, it doesn't say, especially to a young child, and the negative effect that it's going to have on the children.
What was this Chachmas Chitzonius?
So it doesn't-
math or like
so it doesn't say.
philosophy?
It doesn't say. It doesn't say. I have to look in the history what that scholar wanted to do exactly, but it was a variety of limudei chayil. It wasn't just the Russian language. Later, that Rebbe Rashab discusses that there was a possibility that they would enforce that they should have to learn just Russian. There was no other limudei chayil. That is discussed later. The Rebbe Rashab writes in that people who want to give their children to, this was a letter written to Eretz Yisrael, they wanted to give their children to go to a school in Yerushalayim, which teaches them the chayil, and that they don't want the children to be schnars. And the Rebbe says, if you're going to send them to this school, they're not going to be from Yidden. It says that the Rebbe says that it's very strong lashonis, that this limudius, that's what the Rebbe Rashab refers to as the secular studies, that is the main destruction of Yiddishkeit, Frumkeit and Yiddishkeit. And whether the Rebbe Rashab enforces that whoever does send their children to such schools is not going to get money from the Koil Chabad. The Rebbe Rashab talks about the Mefitzi HaSkola, they would establish a Talmud Torah to try to trick people, and they would give the children different secular novels to try to draw their heart. They send the children to universities, and the tremendous damage of the Rabbanim Maskilim, and they pick themselves up as if only they are the prophet, they're the real mention. They used to, in another letter, the Rebbe Rashab speaks about the fact that they make fun of the old style Malamdim, and the Rebbe Rashab says how when a person makes fun, the Gemara says that being tortured is much worse. Being tortured is much harder to stand up to than the serious nefesh. Serious nefesh, a person gives up his life, he can give up his life. But if your person's consistently being hurt, that's much harder to be able to withstand that. And the Rebbe says that being put down and shamed and made fun of, that's something which is very hard for people to withstand. Another point that Rebbe Rashab makes is that at that time it was also a breakdown of morality. It speaks about the pritzus, and even normal menschlichkeit requires a person to be mukter, to be defined in some way. And at that time there was a lot of revolution in Russia against the government, and the Rebbe Rashab speaks about how a lot of them they actually blamed it on the Yidden. A lot of these, the government blamed these revolutions on the Yidden. They said that the Yidden are at fault because a lot of the revolutionists were actually from the Yidden, and the Rebbe Rashab associated this with the fact that the secular studies, the fact that they're learning these things and they're encouraging a certain atmosphere of prikasoil. It all comes together with the general prikasoil. And they actually put a kol koire a call to the youngsters that they're putting the Yidden in danger because of their revolutionary activities. One of the things that they wanted to establish in Russia was that the Rabbanim should have to get some type of degree. Some type of degree was called tzens. With a certain type of degree that they know, that they're familiar with, that they learn some secular studies and get a degree that they were approved. And the Rebbe Rashab fought against this very strong. There was an old rule they passed in 1893 that the Malamdim do not require this. And then there was a discussion in the time of the Rashab that maybe they should require it. And the Rashab writes is they wanted to enforce, so they wanted to say that the Malam should at least have to know Russian. The schools, the Malam should know Russian, schools should teach Russian. The Rashab says the etzem idea is not such a bad gzeira, because then when they do that, then they'll close down all the Maskilim's chadarim, the Maskilim's schools. The Maskilim schools, they had these schools which were made by the Russian government through the Maskilim, and the excuse was that these schools were necessary because the Talmud Torahs did not teach these other things. But once the Talmud Torahs would be approved, then they wouldn't have to have these schools. It wouldn't be government mandated. And the problem would be, though, that the Maskilim would actually have their hands in the Chadarim. Okay, so the what's interesting is that the Rebbe Rashab says that the arguments that the people, some of the Maskilim, the leadership of the Maskilim made, was that they didn't need this because in order to make parnasa, they're also poor. The Jews are poor. The reason why they're poor is because they don't have secular education. If we give them secular education, then they'll be able to make parnasa and they won't be such a poor state. And the Rebbe Rashab point that the Rebbe Rashab made was that these people are not really concerned about the well-being of the poor Yidden. They don't understand it in them. They've removed these rich people in Moscow and Petersburg, wherever they were not in touch with the needs of the people, and they didn't really understand they didn't really care what they need. They were much more interested that these people should become cultured people, they should become educated, but they they were saying that they're concerned about their parnasa and that they should have more money, but that's not really what their motivation was. And he brings a number of he says that he gives one example. There was one time that they in one letter you find that Rebbe Rashab points out that they built homes for people to live in, some type of housing. And the Rebbe Rashab says, first of all, the cost of the housing was very expensive. They were charging a lot for this house. It was sort of housing that were made for Yidden. I don't know the exact circumstances of it. They were making these housing for Yidden to live in, and it was really just very expensive. It wasn't helping, and it was very far from any source of parnasa. So you're trying to help these people get a parnasa, but here you're making these housing, which is not in a place where they're able to get the parnasa. And if they really cared about it, if they really cared about these people, they would help them get parnasa and let them live their life. Rashab writes that the Baron Ginsburg, who was the head of the Maskilim, he was the very wealthy person, very influential person, and he's far from these poor people. He can't understand their mentality, he can't understand their needs, and he really just is obsessed with the secular studies, and he just wants them to become more cultured people. And somebody who's not educated is considered an inferior person. And the Rebbe Rashab explains, so what actually is the solution? The solution would be if they would make schools, they say for Lamalacha, they would make a school where they teach these people skills, and then instead of Chachmas Chassanis, which doesn't help, the Rashab makes an interesting point. He said there's certain people that are not meant to be people. You're not going to turn these people who his parents are his father's he's a Baal Malacha. He's a Baal Malacha. He does work with his hands. He's whatever it is, some type of labor. He's a laborer. And you're not going to take his son and turn him into a high-level al-Arayv. The child is going to be in the same class of his father. And you need to provide him a certain type of malacha, which is Lufi Erkoi, which is something which he's going to be able to pursue. Another letter that Rabbi Rashab writes about the Darkei Chinuch, how the importance from a young age, when the child's mind is clear, to teach him Torah, Yesodis Emunah, Torah Shabbat, Gemara Davka, to understand the Chiluk Hadinim, you understand the importance of teaching Gemara. Why is it so important to teach children Gemara? The Maskilim were against teaching Gemara to young children. They felt the Gemara is a waste of time. Teach them Halacha, teach them Rambam. They liked Rambam, Mishnayos. They felt these are things which Gemara. What is Gemara? So the Rashab explains that when the child learns Gemara, they're able to understand the Chilukei Hadinim. They can understand why one din is like this, why one din is like that. Otherwise, they don't understand why the fine differences between different areas of halacha. he also has to understand the idea, so he has to know how to be asked a shaila. He has to know what's a shaila. If he learns well, he'll be able to ask a shaila. And also, it's chamor in his eyes. When you understand about something, you learn about it, you understand the severity, the weightiness of the matter. If you don't learn you don't really learn much about it, you just learn the practical halacha, you don't understand and appreciate the seriousness of the matter. And finally, it also gives him a cheshek to do the mitzvah. When you understand more about it, it gives you a cheshek to do the mitzvah. These are all reasons why it's important to teach children Gemara. And Bechlal, Torah refines the chumrias, materialism, and it puts midas tovas. And the whole yirida of the youngsters comes because of the fact that they let go of Torah. They're good. It's bad, they're good. But the chumrias, the materialism, has overpowered them. And the importance of establishing a vad chinuch in every single city to make sure that they're learning properly. Now, one of the big stories about that happened during the lifetime of Rashab involving with Haskalah was an organization called, in Yiddish it's spelled Yud Kuf Aleph, Yaker, Yiddish Colonia Association, however it's said, which JCA, Jewish Colony Association. And this was an organization which was established by a wealthy Yid in Paris, Baron Hirsch, who would put aside money to help Yidden with Parnassa. And they had given, the Maskilim got in touch with them, the Maskilim in Russia got in touch with this organization, this foundation in Paris, and they got from them a pledge of maybe 1 million francs. It's a very large amount of money. And the Rebbe Rashab, when he heard about it, he was very frightened by this, because the Maskilim, one of the things that was holding them back is the lack of funds. That's why they weren't able to do as much as they wanted to. And now that they'll have this tremendous amount of money, they're going to start opening schools everywhere, and it's going to be a frolic. So the Rebbe Rashab went on a tremendous campaign to try to cancel this. It's incredible the Rebbe Rashab, the amount of koyach that the Rebbe Rashab put into this, and he went on a campaign to try to cancel this pledge. Right now, you think about it. Why should these Yidden in this association in Paris hear about what a Rebbe in a shtetl in Russia says about? He wrote letters, and he got other rabbanim, other gedolim at the time, Chaim Brisker and the other rabbanim to sign letters and to send letters to this organization. I wish I put a tremendous amount of koyches in this, and it went over a few years. And the end of the story was a tremendous amount of agvas nefesh for the Rebbe Rashab. And this is, if you remember, also this is going on at the same time. As you compare, the Rebbe Rashab at the same time is saying the deepest Maimorim and Chassidus, and his Tmimim is involved. And at the same time, the Rebbe Rashab was putting purpose in this and writing letters. And in the end, he managed to have part of the pledge canceled. It was canceled. The Rebbe Rashab says, hopefully this is what this is what had the effect. But they already gave some of the money, but the rest of the money they canceled. But it wasn't a simple matter. And also, one of the things you find is the Rebbe Rashab, not all the Bili saw at the time saw things exactly how the Rebbe Rashab saw it. They didn't see necessarily the great sakana, the great danger involved in some of these things. Either they felt that some of them were miyush. The Rebbe Rashab writes this in the letters. They felt there's nothing can be done. What are you going to do? You can't change everything. The Rebbe Rashab writes a few places very strongly about people who are miyush, people who are sort of, they say, what are you going to do? How are you going to change it? One place the Rebbe says only a shoita mefared leiv, someone who is foolish and fearful, is messiah, is yush. Rashab says that we can fight and we can win. What? Some of these letters could be in his mind, yeah. So he wrote very strongly. He begged the Baron Ginsburg should not mix in with the young children that didn't listen and help. Tried to moir the other rabbanim They were busy with teaching Torah. He says, well, what does it help? What does it help to teach? You can spread Torah, you can teach Bachim Torah, but they're not going to have. They're ruining the children before they get to it. The organization in Paris, they were deicha. They said, it's just a fanaticism of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, of the Chassidim. That's what they said. They said it's just the Chassidim who are into that. That's why the Rebbe Rashab was so important to get the other Gedolim, the Misnagdim, that they should also sign on. And for Keret, they put their signatures first, and his signature was at the end. That it should come from them, the Iker, because like this, they can't tie it that it's a Chassidish Maisa. Just the Chassidim are fanatics, and they're all opposed to it. At one point, they tied the Baron Ginsburg tied that the signatures are false. It's not real. That Chaim Briska and his other Rabbanim, Chaim Briska didn't actually sign. The Rashab, interesting. The Rashab Chaim Briska wrote a letter, and the Rashab writes he's not so happy with the way he wrote it. The Rashab had a very clear idea exactly how the political strategy, how it should be done, and how it should, how to influence them. Not able to go through everything over here. If anyone wants, you can read about this this story with the Yeke. I printed in Perspective magazine. One of the magazines, the whole story is there. Rashab writes about he went to Paris. He met with a rabbi there. It's very strong terms about this rabbi. It was I don't know what you would call him, conservative, I guess, in today's. Though I don't know officially what he was. Maybe he's considered from. But Rashab writes about him that he has no reach of Torah Shemayim, and he only doesn't eat treifus because he's the rabbi. So, yeah, it's and he didn't want to hear. He said, "Oh, it's also Chassidismus." And Chassidishkeit, as we would say. Chassidische Meise. Okay, so that's one story. We go to another story. We don't have a lot of time. Just skip ahead. The story like this: they wanted to make a. We have time. We'll go to Masifas Rabbanim. Machziki Adas. There was an idea that came up in the early Samachs that they would make an organization which would unite all of from the Yidden. They would belong to this organization. This idea of making an organization, of bringing together all the from the Yidden had already been brought up by the Germans, the German Yidden, about Mei Aguda, which took years till they established it, until it actually came to fruition. And that's a whole story for itself. But Rebbe Rashab was not happy with the establishment of Aguda and the way it was done. So it's all a fascinating story. But the Rebbe Rashab, this idea of Masiki Adas came from the Slonim Rebbe. Slonim Rebbe came to Lubavitch. He met with the Rebbe Rashab. Famously said he said a few expressions. He told us to look into the eyes, which saw a true tzaddik, and he suggested this idea that they should make a association of all from Jews. They should establish. Make sure there's shurim in every community. They should learn in the chedorim. They should learn after alten oifen. They should learn the old style without the new modern methods. So the Rebbe Rashab was very happy about this idea, and he pushed it very much. And he emphasized the general, the nyanim which get to the general Yiddishkeit. It was not to get stuck on the details of making the shechita and the mikvahs, and those are also, of course, very important. But the general Yiddishkeit that people should hear Shemayim in general. The Rebbe Rashab describes the situation then, at that time. How people at that time, he says like this, he says in one letter, he writes, there were days in the past when every Baal Esek had itim kavum l'Torah. Every Baal Esek, by day he would work, by night he would come to the Beis Medrash, he would learn several hours, each person according to his ability. Many Balabatim learned Gemara and Poskim with Iyun HaToiv, especially Shulchan Aruch HaChaim, to know as a Ma'aser Sheyasim, especially before Yom Tov. And this brought a Tnuas Chaim, a movement of life and a Seiderus by Yidden, to be careful about Kimcha the Piska, the matzah, that it should be kosher, the matzah should be properly kosher, and they were machmer a number of important things, and they checked out what's important, the daled minim, to make sure those which are kosher daled minim, not just to look at the nice daled minim, but to make sure that it's kosher. As the Messiah. Also, when it comes to tefillin, to get from a sefer, Yerushalayim, talis and tzitzis and kvois, and right away they found a problem. They went to go to the Rav. So it was the biggest seirus. Now, however, says the Rebbe Rashab, it's almost all gone. Beis Medrash are empty of people. No one comes to learn. There's no one who's mis'oider to be mehader in mitzvahs, even when it touches on a chumrah d'yisura. And someone who says there's a hechsher, someone who says he has a hechsher, so they just buy and they eat without looking into what's the hechsher, who's the machshir. No one worries about this, and it's not because they're it's not because they're not serious. It's just because it's like the hergish aliki is sleeping. And also, they don't stand up against the tzirei hayadus, those who fight against Yiddishkeit, who want to break in. They have this weakness to themselves. They don't notice what's going on. He says we have to strengthen this before it dies out completely. And that's where he says we can't give up. We have the strength. And he says, very interesting, he says that we know that our chizuk is much greater than the chizuk of the machadshim. That they are just make themselves very strong. But they're not really betzim strong. But when we connect to Hashem and His Torah, we're strong betzim. If you want, you can read the letter in here in these booklets. I printed a few copies. Very, very strong letter, very interesting. The way he describes the situation then, and the influence that the children have on their parents, and how the parents not able to stand up for what's right. But one nekuda which is very clear in the Rebbe Rashab, this was something that differentiated the Rebbe Rashab and other leaders, especially this came up by the Aguda, but it's also by the Machzikei Adas, is that we should only, who do you include in this Aguda? So there were two attitudes in this group. One attitude was to try to get as many people as possible, to get everyone, include everyone, and then you'll have more Yidden. First of all, you'll have all these people, but you also will make the whole Aguda stronger. And then Rebbe Rashab said, "Kum fakir." You only include the people who are actually really committed and serious, and toiv mat v'kavana. It has to be a serious Aguda of people who are actually committed and frum. By the Aguda, the story about the Aguda Yisrael over there was even stronger because there was questions of how the group might evolve. And as you include people who are not really fully on board, the whole form of the organization is going to change, and it's not going to have it's going to change direction over time. It depends what you're doing. As I started off saying in the beginning, it depends if you're trying to build a community or you're trying to save Yidden. You're trying to save neshamas, so then things. But then it was about holding. There was some community to hold. There was a community there was an infrastructure. So you want to protect that infrastructure. Once that infrastructure is all gone, so now it's a garnish. So now you have to save your cop where you can. It's not a stid. It's just two different. Yeah. This is a famous word. He told Nachman Shimon son. He told him about the Machzikei Adas, even though it looked like things are very hard and it's not succeeding the way they imagined. He says that now, but the siyum habirudim is like when a pot is bubbling, it's boiling, and things are moving around constantly, and you just have to. And it looks like it's all bilti seder. You can't work in a Masudic way nowadays, since everything is and godless and things are moving around. You just have to grab whatever you can and do whatever you could. Okay, we're not going to be able to cover anything more. I'll stop over here. But the idea is that Hakel is not only Laman Yilmadu, is Laman Yishmu v'Yoru es Hashem, to take heroes and Avodas Hashem. If anyone wants, there's
Take them with the color. Staples did a good job. Should there be no more I couldn't read all the back part.
Should we stop? How do you stop? This one.